welcome to the Print Softcover, where we do the digital release of new, upcoming, exciting books. I'm TCA Sharad Raghavan, Deputy Editor at The Print, and this time we're going to do the digital release of a book called Dr. Steel, My Life and Times with the Tatas by Mr. J.J. Irani, a stalwart of the steel sector, an eminent industrialist, and a real cog in India's growth engine, especially to do with the steel sector. Now, unfortunately, Dr. Irani passed away in October last year, and so we can't have him in the conversation. But we have with us Mr. N.K. Sharan, who's a senior official in the Tata Group and who the book has used extensively, as in the book is based on Mr. Sharan's conversations with Dr. Irani. And so Mr. Sharan is greatly placed to talk to us about the book. Thank you, sir, for joining us.
Thank you, Sharan. Thank you so much for having me on
So,
this.
sir, absolutely. It's my pleasure, sir. And now I'd like to start with, the book focuses a lot on Tata Steel. And so I just wanted to ask you, in your estimation and through your conversations with Dr. Irani, do you feel that Tata Steel itself as a company was a game changer in the steel sector? And if so, how?
Yeah, so thank you, Sharad. Tata Steel indeed, has been a game changer. When Dr. Irani took over as the managing director of Tata Steel, that time it also coincided with the 1992 liberalization, globalization, and privatization effort of the government. And at that point of time, Tata Steel was a very, I would say, McKinsey has given a report that this industry, the sunset industry, and all the competitiveness metric of Tata Steel was, very, very, I would say, not in a good shape. The cost, Tata Steel was one of the highest cost producer of steel. The productivity was very low. There were huge manpower. Most of the assets were very old. So at that point of time, Tata Steel was in very bad shape. And at some point of time, some of the consultants, even it's officially known that Arthur Anderson, at that point of time, Arthur the Little, they had given a report that if Tata Steel doesn't transform itself, it's going to die soon. And at that
and
point
around what
time,
year was this, sir?
It was around 92, 93. This report from Arthur the Little was in early 90s, I would say, at that point of time. And McKinsey report also said almost the same thing, that, steel, they also spoke about industry, but in particular, they also spoke about Tata Steel, which stated that Tata Steel is one of the highest cost producer of steel and therefore very uncompetitive at the global stage.
Right.
So that was the time when Dr. Irani took over. And when Dr. Irani kind of retired or superannuated from Tata Steel in 2001, I think the story was completely different. When in 2001, Tata Steel was one of the lowest cost producer of steel in the world. It became one of the most competitive steel company in the world. All its assets, had become almost brand new with the latest of the technology. And Dr. Irani was able to reduce the heavy load of manpower, which used to be almost to the tune of 78,000, 80,000. He brought it down to 40,000 painlessly. I think that's in a Tata manner, in a Tata way. So that's extremely important. So Tata Steel, became extremely competitive, by the time Dr. Irani superannuated in 2001. So that's the story of, almost like 20 years from 90s to 2001. And the 10-year which Dr. Irani was at the helm transformed Tata Steel from one of the most uncompetitive steel company in India to one of the most competitive steel company in the world. So that's the transformation Tata Steel has happened under the chairman under the leadership of Dr. Irani, and therefore I take your point that it was a game changer moment for Tata Steel.
Right. And now the subtitle of the book is My Life and Times with the Tatas. And there's one absolutely fascinating chapter in the book which talks about the learnings of Dr. J.J. Irani from J.R.D. Tata, who himself was another giant of the field and an industrialist that needs no introduction. So could you tell us a little bit about maybe the top learning or the top two learnings that Dr. Irani got from Mr. Tata?
Yeah, so thank you, Sharad, once again. So JRD was, Mr. Dr. Irani considered JRD as his, godfather, the pure mentor. And there are historical reasons also why, he considered JRD as his mentor as well as his, godfather, because, at some point of time when Dr. Irani was studying at Sheffield, University, I think, and it was under the scholarship, Tata scholarship, JRD has written a note that looking at the records, academic records of Dr. Irani, that if this boy ever wants to come back to India, the Tatas will welcome him, to that. And that was the initial, I would say, introduction of Dr. Irani to JRD. JRD came back to India. He met JRD, and later on he was appointed as one of, I would say, the general managers in Tata Steel and so on and so forth.
Right.
But I think more importantly, he was tremendously impressed by JRD because of many values which we even today call it Tata values, that he saw that JRD embodied all those values in his personal life. And the book talks about, a few anecdotes. So one of the anecdotes, it talks about that, JRD came to stay in one of the director bungalows of Tata Steel at Jamshedpur. And next day when, the usual inquiry, Dr. Irani went to the director bungalow and he asked JRD, were you comfortable yesterday? And JRD said, no, I was not comfortable because, the AC was very cold. And he said, but Mr. Tata, you have a bearer, Shahab over there, who always sleeps, in front of your room. And you could have just told him that he could have adjusted the air conditioner there. And the answer to the JRD was that, no, I went to wake up Shahab, but he was sleeping so soundly that I hesitated to wake him up. And that showed the human side of JRD, being the chairman. JRD, by the way, was the chairman of Tata Group for the 50 years. And the chairman, was finding it difficult to wake a bearer who was sleeping over there to wake him up. And he slept the entire night in, extremely cold situation. So that was the human side of JRD, which, Dr. Irani has mentioned in the book. There are many, but I think
there are, of course, yes.
Yeah, but some of those anecdotes are absolutely fabulous. And, one anecdote which he writes that JRD was, chairman for the 50 years for the Tata Group. But when he passed away, he didn't had much. He didn't had a house, his own house in Bombay, and he didn't had much cash in his, bank account also.
Right.
That showed, the value system which JRD embodied and which he led, which has tremendous impression on on Dr. Irani for his leadership style also.
No, of course. The book actually it's studied with several of these really lovely anecdotes throughout Dr. Irani's life. A lot of it, of course, has to do with his time with Mr. J.R.D. Tata. A lot of it has to do about various anecdotes through his life. But really interestingly, it also talks about some of the technological changes that Tata Steel brought about, that it innovated, and that then came and were implemented in the wider industry. Like, say, for example, the book talks about the oxygen blowing process. So, I mean, I don't want you to go into the technicals of these, but would you be able to tell us about some other innovations that Tata Steel brought about that were then used by the rest of the industry?
Yes, Sharad. And I think Dr. Irani, being a technocrat, he
Right.
understood the technology very well. And the book talks about one example. I think the steel industry folks will understand, the coke ovens technology. So
Yes.
this is one technology which was being used. It's called stamp charging technology. Stamp charging technology, typically Indian coal is very high percentage in ash, and therefore
Yes.
you require a very different kind of a process to make coal out of coke so that it can be used in the blast furnace. And
Mm.
it has a huge impact on the cost of the steel. So coke
Right.
making or the coal making is a very important aspect of any steel making process. Now, Dr. Irani, somehow through literature survey, he writes in the book that through literature survey, he could know about the stamp charging technology which was being used in Germany. There's a company called
Yes.
SAP Saarburg Interplan. And he said that he, along with one or two of his technological, advisors and friends, he went to Germany. He saw that technology is being used by thermal power generation plant, not by the steel
Right.
plant. And it
Mm.
was a question to be asked that, if they all felt that this technology can be adapted to the steel making process also. So they collaborated with the Saarburg Interplant in Germany, and they, on an experimental basis, they said that, okay, let's take a risk, and that's where the innovation come. But the risk was around 200 crores. They took the risk. They spent some 200 crores, and they implemented the first stamp charge technology which produced coal for the blast furnace. It was the seventh, battery of Tata Steel. I remember
Mhm.
because, as a new graduate engineer, my first posting was in the seventh, coke ovens
Oh,
battery in the
I
operations.
see.
And I still remember that time I didn't know all these, the macro picture. I was a simple 23 or 22-year-old graduate engineer who was working in the operating part of the coke ovens there. But I think I realized that it was absolutely out of the box thinking, that some
Right.
technology which is being used for a thermal power plant, how can that be used and adapted for a steel company? And with that adoption of the technology, Tata Steel became one of the lowest cost producer of a steel in the world, because coke rate is a very important factor for
Yes, it's a very big
overall
component.
cost of the steel. So
Right.
by adopting that technology, from a power plant, and that was the first in India, maybe first in the world, that stamp charging technology was being deployed at Tata Steel, and Dr. Irani, with his technological mind, he experimented that 200 crores, and thank God that it was successful. And not only Tata Steel, Tata Steel obviously converted all the coke plant to the stamp charge technology later, one by one,
Right.
but all the steel industry, now are using the stamp charging technology because,
Yes.
Tata Steel was successful in 1988, and they adopted that stamp
And
charging.
imagine 200 crores in 1988.
Yes, yes. So that was a
That's a
big
huge
risk.
amount.
That
Yeah.
was a big risk, and that was the power of Dr. Irani. That absolutely fabulous. When anybody who understands the steel will understand how difficult that decision could be. But Dr. Irani and his colleagues, they took that innovative, I would say, decision, and they experimented with that decision. It was not very successful. Again, people also feel that when you take an innovative idea, overnight you become successful. No,
Of
I think
course. Yeah.
if you look at Tata Steel story also, the stamp charging technology, while it was adopted and experimented, it did not become successful on day one. It took almost a year or two to adapt that technology and make it successful, Tata Steel. So I think
Right.
that also the perseverance of the leader to withstand that kind of a challenge, but with all the determination to make it successful is what the leadership is all about. And I think Dr. Irani, with all his colleagues, demonstrated ample amount of those leadership and
Right.
technological leadership at that point of time.
And now you speak about leadership, but there is one leader that he met, and that is documented in the book. He met this leader when the leader was very young. That is none other than Lalu Prasad Yadav. He met him as a student leader, and but recognized in him that he would go the distance, and so decided to cultivate a relationship with him. Could you tell us a little bit more about Dr. Irani's relationship with Lalu Prasad Yadav?
Yes, Sharad. So, Dr. Irani's relationship with Lalu Prasad Yadav was very special, and he has mentioned it to me umpteen number of times.
Right.
Uh, he also stated that, when he proposed that Tata Steel should do a little bit more to build relationship with the Chief Minister of Bihar, the board was not very keen. The board at that point of time felt that in Bihar, the chief minister typically don't stay more than a year or so. So
Right.
they were of the view that, why should Jamshed Irani should spend too much of time and energy to build relationship? Because as such, Lalu Prasad has come, and maybe after a year or so, he will also go and some new chief minister will come. But I think
Hmm.
Dr. Irani again was very insightful. I think he had a sense that this chief minister, a student leader and a young student leader, is going to stay for long. And therefore, it is imperative that good relationship should be built with Lalu Prasad Yadav. I think he started building relationship, and he writes in his memoir also that sometimes you don't have anything common between you and the person you want to build relationship. But I think you have to start making an effort and start looking at some of the common areas which interest both of us. And he has stated that, while I was very clear that we will work, we will behave Tata way, we are not going to pay any money or any bribe to Lalu Prasad Yadav. But he also was very convinced. In fact, he was so convinced that whenever he used to meet Dr. Irani, and this book talks about many such anecdotes where he is meeting a factory inspector, and factory inspector has asked for money, and Dr. Irani has kind of, when Lalu Prasad Yadav visited Jamshedpur, he
Mm.
made a mention to that factory inspector, and immediately within 5 minutes, Lalu Prasad Yadav has called that factory inspector and has given him left and right, and immediately, the job has been done, and so on and so forth. So I think the beautiful part of this relationship is that Lalu Prasad Yadav, the relationship was so strong and so good that they knew each other's strengths, they knew each other's weaknesses. Lalu Prasad also was very clear that, when he is dealing with Dr. Irani, he is dealing with a person who has got tremendous credibility. He will not go out of the way to, satisfy him by any other means. But he was also Dr. Irani has written in the book that I was very clear that if Lalu Prasad Yadav wants, some help in hospital modernization or some help in, some educational institute modernization, Tatas will never hesitate in spending money. And he did that. In fact, Patna Medical Hospital, the children ward was perhaps at that point of time, Tata's did help to kind of modernize that and create a new ward and so on and so forth. So
Right.
the relationship was very mutual, respect for each other. Dr. Irani has also given in anecdotes how they all went to Singapore along with the chief secretary and so on and so forth. It's fascinating how Lalu Prasad Yadav also as a leader was able to adapt. I mean, he gives one anecdote that, when he was traveling with Lalu Prasad Yadav was talking in English to the Singapore Prime Minister. So he suggested, sir, you don't have to talk in English, you talk in Hindi. And he gave example that, when the French Prime Minister comes, he talks in French. When the Spanish Prime Minister comes, in Spanish. So why you should not talk in Hindi? And Lalu Prasad had agreed to that suggestion. And he said the quality of conversation with Lalu Prasad Yadav, with the Prime Minister of Singapore, was just elevated the moment he started talking in Hindi. And those were, I think, the beautiful anecdotes which, of a relationship which this book talks about. And people will just, relish reading and these anecdotes between.
No, absolutely. Me as well, reading the book was absolutely fascinating, and not just because I'm an economic journalist, but because steel is such an important sector in our lives. And, we've all grown up with the name, the Tata Group, and the famous Tata values. And so to read the memoirs of somebody who was, kind of in those Tata values for so long is absolutely fascinating. But on that note, thank you so much for joining us, sir. It was a wonderful conversation, and congratulations on the book.
Thank you, Sharad.